I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Nice to meet you.
Vito Ramos.
Yeah.
I went ahead and I'll be able to pull up your Dark Roast Revelations page so that people can look at it. And
Oh,
also,
great. Thank you.
I'm going to pull up Google Map of the
Okay.
Wetmore Landing area and the Hogback Mountain and all that stuff. So when we're talking about it, I may pull that stuff up just so that we can, you know, have a visual of the areas and stuff like that.
Okay. Sounds good.
So how do you know about me?
You know, when the when I first started becoming really interested in hearing more and more of the stories was probably 5 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, and I came across an interview. Um, I I I think it was one of the Bigfoot channels on YouTube, and the story just blew my mind. Like I just was fascinated by the things that were being discussed, and it just kind of it stood out to me. And fast forward 1,000 hours later of just listening to everything that I could possibly get my hands on. When I was doing some research the other day, I came across um, the group that I think you started, which is I think it's called the Sensible Bigfoot Project,
Yeah,
correct?
yeah, yeah. That's my
Yeah.
YouTube channel.
Okay, yeah. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna shoot him an email and see if we can talk because I I really appreciate how you approach things, and I just think
I really
it's
think
conversations that are
I
important.
I was talking to my friend either yesterday or today, and I feel like I'm filling a niche that may not be there, and that is not only the sensible approach to what we're dealing with, but
Mhm.
just, I mean, keeping it all down on a level that we can understand what we're discussing. I try not to go too far out in left field or too far out in right field. If the evidence doesn't show me what's happening, I just don't jump a gap to get somewhere. And I think it's working for me. Especially since I had my encounter the way I had my encounter, had the visual and was able to see certain behaviors and listen to certain behaviors that tells me not only their intelligence but their ability to strategize and work together and communicate. All of that was exposed to me within that encounter that I had. So I kind of hit the ground running at that point
Yeah.
because I had all that information from just one encounter.
Mhm.
So that's what pushes me. I want to talk to people. I like trying to identify patterns of behavior. These things do specific things, man. So yeah, I'm always interested in people's stories, and I appreciate you reaching out to me too. And I'm glad that you have your own podcast that you're working. How long have you had a podcast?
5 days.
Oh, so it is really new. Okay, okay.
Yeah, it's in its infancy. In my head it's been there for a couple of years. And I say that because it was always my intention once I sat down and had a conversation with myself just about what kind of future do I want? What do I want to pass on to my daughter? What's important to me? What am I good at? Um, I didn't like where I was headed career wise. As good as it was on paper, it just isn't something that I was passionate about anymore. And I was like, you know what? Um, I'm gonna I'm gonna put everything on the line and pursue this. And I just really have a passion for it. So whatever happens, happens. But I just want to hear people's stories. I want to talk to people with an open mind as well, other things that I became interested in. And Bigfoot happens to be one of them, especially considering whatever show I was listening to, when those people told their story about being in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, having a tent, and having two creatures growl at them and intimidate them while they stole their food. I couldn't, I still can't believe it. It makes the hair it's happening right now. It makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Because then I went back in time and I'm like, wait a minute, that happened to me. And I'm constantly, not constantly, but whenever I tell the story, I'm like, these two bears were so weird. They stood up on two legs and were growling at each other back and forth. And then when we would move, they would growl at the tent, and then they pushed on the truck and they drank all the beer and ate all the meat. And when I tell people the story, when I get to the last part of the story, people are always like, what? What do you mean two bears drank 2 cases of beer that you guys had? I'm like, yeah, I know. It's so weird. And they didn't touch the sugar. They didn't touch any of the cereal or anything like that. And it's always been a story that I tell because it's kind of funny. And
Wow.
looking back at it, I just asked my mom last night because I told her about this. And I asked her if she remembered that.
And so far, I've got no evidence whatsoever that these things are not just physical creatures with incredible abilities, and maybe more cognizant. My daughter was talking to me about a study that she was doing about the human brain compared to apes and chimps and things like that. And there's a part in the front cortex that what separates us from some of the other primates is one little section of the brain that allows us to have strategy. That's how we've taken over the world. Strategy and planning. I think Bigfoot has the same thing in their brain. They can strategize. They know their actions have consequences, so they avoid certain things. So I think they are so far up the evolutionary line that they too have developed the same things that we have, but have stayed hidden and in our periphery. I think it's fascinating. I'm still fascinated with it, and
Yeah.
putting these little links together just it brings me great joy. So,
Yeah, I think that that's a really, it's a great way to approach it, just to keep it, just to approach as much of it as possible without speculating. I have a hard time not jumping to conclusions about things sometimes because it's so interesting to me, and I have to reel myself back in a little bit, and then I realized recently that the more I learn about all of this, the less I feel like I know.
true.
It becomes even more mysterious, and the behaviors that some people report, even speaking of altruism, I've heard stories where Bigfoot acts in a completely altruistic way. This has no real benefit to them, and yet they acted on behalf of a human being, a completely different species. Perhaps, maybe, I don't know if humans are actually a different species. Maybe they're more like us than I could even imagine. But it's it's a subject that I never expected to pay much attention to, until I'm actually wearing the hat on the other side. Missing 411. I don't know if you've ever seen Dave Politis videos.
Got all the books.
He's, me too. He, this must have been 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago. Yeah. He started me down this rabbit hole because I was watching one of his Missing 411 videos. By the way, the title of my show is a tribute to him. I'll explain that later, but it just has to do with having a cup of coffee and watching Dave Politis videos. And he interviewed, I think his name is Bobo Frey. Is that his name? Bobo Frey. He's kind of a, yeah.
Right. From the Finding Bigfoot show.
There you go. Yeah. So I haven't watched much of that show. I still haven't to this day really watched that show. I've mostly listened to podcasts and things like that. But when Dave Politis interviewed him, I thought, what's he doing interviewing this person about Bigfoot for? And then he talked about the Gimlin film. And I went back and watched it with a new set of eyes because I was listening to all the details that he was saying to watch out for. Number one, it's a female. I didn't know that. I only remembered when I was a little kid, this must have been in the early 90s. It was either 60 Minutes or one of the news shows back in the day, and they played that film. And I remember I think it was because Harry and the Hendersons had come out, actually. So it was somewhere around that time. And they played that Gimlin film, and I remember watching it as a little kid, and I was blown away. I'm like, I'm in the woods all the time. I grew up in Northwest Connecticut. I'm going to go find this thing. And then, at the end of the day, they show you the video, they talk about it, they speak to all these people, and then they're like, yeah, but it's not real, and that really bothered me because I was so excited by that idea. And since then, whenever that was, late 80s, early 90s, I just never thought about it. I never ever thought about it. And even after having the experience that I had, uh, I still didn't, speaking of jumping to conclusions, I didn't jump to that conclusion. I didn't think of it. Just thought it was really weird, really, really weird. Um, and now here I am, knee deep in the subject and just wanting more and more and more.
Let's go to the very beginning.
Sure.
You say you were going out there. You told me that you were traveling out of Gaylord with a coworker because you guys are going to build a trailhead something for a ranger station or something like that. So
Yeah.
just
So
give me the whole laydown and
sure,
the time frame and just everything that you can about it, and I'll ask questions as needed.
sure. So this was the summer of 2003, and I want to say it was probably July. And the reason I think it was July is because it was before I went back east for a wedding, which I know was in August, and it was after I turned 21, which is in May. Um, I was homeless at the time and had been couch surfing, and I had an offer to work for this guy who had become an acquaintance of mine through the church that I was attending up there at the time, and he offered a room and board as long as I worked for him. And so, of course, I jumped at the chance. And the first job that we had was to head out of Gaylord to the Upper Peninsula in Michigan. So I'm not familiar with the geography at all at the time. So this is all new to me. This is just a big adventure, and I would have done anything for work, regardless. I was more of a grunt for on the construction sites. So we head up north, and I want to say the trip was probably 4 or 5 hours long. And as we get to now, we're using MapQuest at the time, and so it's a printout of 6 or 7 pages of turning here and turning there. There's no GPS or anything like that. And when we got to where the last turn was on MapQuest, it was what I can remember clearly is thinking, this isn't a road because we were on some kind of really beaten up dirt path that veered off of the main road and just went deep, 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 deep into the woods. And when we finally got to the location, it was obvious where it was because there was a guy there waiting for us who I think was a park ranger. And there was a foundation laid out for the booth that we were going to finish building. So the person that I was working for was a carpenter. And I don't know how he got his jobs, but he was commissioned to finish this booth. I'm assuming for the park rangers up there. So, what I remember about the forest there is I had grown up, in country, but I had never seen country like this before in my life. The Upper Peninsula of Michigan, if you haven't been there, it's an amazing place. But
Can I
there's
go ahead and
something.
pull this up?
Sure, yeah,
All right. So here we are.
yeah,
There's
there it
Wetmore
is.
Landing
Hogback
and
Mountain.
Hogback Mountain. And you said you were somewhere on the east side of Big Bay Road.
Yeah, we were somewhere in that area. I want to. I think it was on the left side though. The
We could
left side
actually
of the road.
find a little structure that maybe you guys built.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you the story.
Okay.
We didn't end up finishing that structure. So we the first I remember when we first started unloading stuff from the truck to get to work because we got to work as soon as we got there, which was the late afternoon on the first day. The gentleman who was there waiting for us told us to be careful because people who had been camping around there had been having their stuff taken. And I remember he said by bears. And so I hadn't, even though I grew up where I grew up, I hadn't seen a bear before. I Bears weren't something I was really interested in. I was always interested in sharks. So I could have told you more about a shark than I could tell you about a bear or bear behavior. But so I know that the guy that I was with, just for a quick description, I'm going to call him Graham. He was a really gruff dude. We weren't exactly friends. He was going through a pretty tough time with a divorce. So he was drinking heavily all the time. And one thing that he made sure of was that he had cases of beer to bring with us on the trip. Now, lucky for him, even though I just turned 21, I don't like the taste of beer. I still don't like the taste of beer. So, no problem. Have at it. He drank on the job site. We did our job. At the end of the day, we set up our tent a little bit further out from where the booth was. I want to say probably 50 yards or so into the woods.
Can I throw this in? Uh,
Sure.
Most people that are listening at this point may or may not have heard some of the things that I may have to clip out at the beginning,
Mhm.
but it's interesting that you say that you don't like beer. I've never been a drinker. I drank beer when I was 17 just to see what it was like. I hated it and was
Yeah.
done with it. From that moment on,
Lucky us.
I've never been a beer drinker. I hate it.
Lucky us, because it becomes a really expensive habit and it ruins your belly, man. You get
Right.
your belly at an early age. I've seen it happen to
Crazy.
quite a few of my comrades and friends. Uh, yes. So the first night that we were there, it's always awkward not knowing somebody and sharing a tent with them. We had a pretty sizable tent because Graham was a big guy. I'm only 5'8". Graham was probably 6'2" or 6'3". He's a big dude. So it's a big tent. And the first night, I think he went through a case of beer that day. So he had brought 3 cases with us. There were 2 cases left after that first day. The second day, we go back to the job site. We probably worked 12 hours that day. It was probably a quarter of the way finished by the time we were done. We worked a really, really long day. And that second night, when we turned down for the evening, we had cooked, I think, some hot dogs. And I remember we had Nutri-Grain bars, which I thought were heaven on earth at the time. I wouldn't touch them with a 10-foot pole now, but I thought Nutri-Grain bars were great. So we had, a case of those. What happened was, all of the advice that we were given about not bringing food into the tent, Graham ignored that because he's just one of those dudes, man. And he brought Nutri-Grain bars into the tent. I remember that because I thought later on, oh, this guy got me killed because of Nutri-Grain bars. So that night, and I'll tell you this because I've had a dream since I was young, and it's a very specific dream, and it happens every once in a while. It's nothing that I can control. And I remember this moment very specifically because of what happened next. That night I was having this dream that I've been experiencing for quite some time. And the dream is that I'm walking through the empty streets of this town that was nearby where I grew up called Pine Plains. And as I'm walking through the streets, it happens every single time. I get lifted up into the air really quickly. And then I start falling towards the street really quickly. So I'm having that dream, and I'm sorry. I'm like, it's my heart is palpitating a little bit right now, just thinking of it. And as I'm floating in the air in the dream, it was as clear as day. The dream is interrupted by something. Now, so how I'm sleeping in the tent is my head is towards the backside and Graham's feet are to the right of me. So Graham's head is towards the front of the tent. My head is towards what would be the back of the tent. Right next to Graham's head is the zipper and everything to get out. And in the dream, something starts roaring into the back of my head. I mean, roaring into the back of my head. And in that state, I was like lucid, and then I was like, I could hear it in the dream, and I'm like, oh my god, I'm waking up, and that noise is still going. It's not part of the dream, and I'm laying there, and this noise is coming from something that's pushing on the tent right next to the back of my head, right here, and it's like that. And so I'm frozen in fear. I'm frozen. And instantly I'm thinking it's a bear coming for the Nutri-Grain bars. And I can't believe I'm going to die this way. I can't believe I'm going to die right here in this tent. And I'm not going to be able to say goodbye to my mom. I'm not going to be able to say goodbye to my sisters. This bear is going to come in here and kill me over smelling food in here. So I'm laying there frozen. For whatever reason, I thought, if this bear comes in here, I have a hammer right next to me. I'm gonna give it my all, and I'm gonna hit it as hard as I can on the nose, and hopefully make a run for the truck, something like that. And so I'm laying there thinking all this. I'm gripping the hammer, and the roaring, or the growl. It was like when I woke up and started. The more I thought about what was happening, it was like this. It was like it understood that I was awake at that point. And as soon as a couple of seconds went by, it didn't growl anymore. It roared, and it. I felt it in my body. I'm shaking right now thinking about it. I felt it in my body. It was like my bones were rattling, and it's not like it just does that and stops. It's roaring into the back of my head, and it's the noise is coming from very close behind me at this point. And then the roaring kind of dies down and starts sniffing near the back of my head. I'm like, oh man, this is it. What do I do here? Okay. There's two of us. I have a hammer. Graham's a big guy. If I wake him up, maybe we can fight this thing off. Maybe we have a chance to live here. So I start kind of edging my butt down so I can get close to. He's tall, right? So to get to where his ear is, and by the way, he hasn't woken up, which is even crazier. He hasn't woken up. I'm edging my way towards him slowly, trying not to agitate this thing, because now it kind of backed up a little bit, and it's growling, grumbling, growling, grumbling. And I get close to Graham, and for whatever reason, have you ever seen the movies where, and I'm sorry for all those squeaks, that's my chair. Have you ever seen the movies where someone is aware that they're in danger and their friend is sleeping next to them, and they wake them up by covering their mouth with their hand, and they just go shh. And for whatever reason, the person's cool and calm and collected, and they understand perfectly what the story is. That's how it is in movies. You just cover someone's mouth while they're sleeping, and they understand they're in danger and it's time to be quiet. It does not work in real life at all. It does not work like that. Don't do it, especially if there's a creature outside your tent. So I cover Grant. I decide that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to wake up Grant by covering his mouth and tell him what's going on. I cover his mouth. He loses it. He wakes up. He jumps up, throws his arms up, hits me in the face. He screams, ah! As he's screaming, it was like it got turned up. He was like, ah! As he's doing that, on his side of the tent, where his head was, there's the same noise, and it's a roar. It roars through the tent, and he's, I can see him now. My eyes are a bit adjusted. I can see him, and his face is like, okay, now I get it. We're in some kind of trouble here. So this thing is roaring, and I'm thinking, oh, that the bear walked around to this side of the tent, and it for whatever reason, I'm like, it knows to come through the front of the tent. I'm thinking it's going to come through the front now. And as it's roaring, the noise is closer to the ground where Graham's head would have been, but the noise rises like tall above the tent. And so now I'm thinking, oh my God, we pissed this bear off so bad that it's standing on two legs. This thing's gonna come in here and tear us apart. As I'm thinking of circus videos where the bear stands up, or intimidation videos where bears are fighting, or I've seen that where grizzlies stand up, and I'm like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. And it's roaring and it's up like that. And as it's roaring, the other one, now I realize there's two, the other one answers it. So now I'm positive that we're dead. I was pretty sure we're dead before. Now I'm positive they're dead. Now I'm thinking there's two angry bears that are so mad that one of them is standing up outside of the tent. Then the one, so now the one that was near Graham is standing up. There's two of them. The one that's behind me that was roaring in my head, the noise starts coming from up high too. I wasn't looking that way, so I couldn't see a silhouette or anything like that. And they start growling and grumbling back and forth over the tent. And we're sitting there. I've never been so scared. I've had another scary encounter in my life. This was scarier than that. And that one was pretty bad too. But this one, it was like an out of body experience. And I was feeling hopeless, like absolutely hopeless, because the one thing that I understood was these things are really big. It's really big because the moon was where Graham's side of the tent was. The moon was kind of the moon was pointing down at us from that direction. It was a very clear sky, and when I forgot to mention, it was raining. It was raining very gently at the time too, and I could see that this thing. I could see the silhouette of it, standing like that, and I just was thinking, okay, let's come up with a plan. We have to do something. Like we're gonna have to fight our way out of here no matter what. As these bears are coming into the tent. And so Graham whispers to me, he says that he has an idea. He's going to set off the truck alarm. Now, his truck was one of those massive trucks where you had to, I mean, I'm 5'8". He probably didn't have to do it, but I had to grab a bar to get up into his truck bed in order to sit in the passenger seat. I had to grab a bar, step up. It's a tall truck. He says, I'm going to get my keys and set off the car alarm. I'm going to set off the truck alarm. So I'm thinking, okay, and he grabs his jacket. I'm thinking this is probably a great idea. He gets his jacket, fumbles through his jacket that's next to him in the tent, grabs the keys. And it was like every second felt like an hour at that point. There was so much adrenaline in my body that I thought they could hear my heartbeat. I was sure that these two bears could hear my heartbeat. I was positive. And he sets off the truck alarm. It's loud, man. The way that the trees are set up there, it's almost like it makes everything echo. It was such a strange effect. It's loud. It's going off for 5 seconds, 4 seconds, 3 seconds. They these bears that I think are bears, they don't move, right? Like, or at least we didn't hear them move. I didn't hear them move. And he turns off the truck alarm thinking, okay, well, they're not doing anything. So maybe they're gone. As soon as he turns off the truck alarm, you hear the one that was near him. So the truck was where I was laying down in the tent with my head to the back. The truck would have been to my left. The bed of the truck would have been about 5 feet to my left outside of the tent. The one that was near Graham, which would have been closer to the passenger door, it turns towards the truck and it screams. And I mean, blood-curdling, terrifying roar / scream, everything at once towards the truck. And I'm like, oh my God, now they're even angrier. Like, oh my God, we're really dead, man. It didn't work. And it boom, 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 stomps over to the truck. And the other one moves over to the truck. You can just hear them moving towards it on the outside. And Graham sets off the truck alarm again. And they both go nuts, just roaring, roaring, roaring and you hear the truck on the you hear the truck going ranting, 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 because something is pushing on it or hitting it. We don't know what they're doing, but you can just hear that, and you can hear the tires like kind of splashing up, and that went on for probably 30 seconds or so. Graham just left. He just left the alarm on the truck, hoping that something would click and they would get scared. They weren't scared at all. And he turns it off again. We sit there in the tent in silence, and these two are they're grumbling back and forth again, like turn towards the tent, like whoever's in there, stay down, shut up, don't do that again, type of thing. And I'm like, I'm happy to stay in the tent if they're not going to come in here, because now at this point, there's nothing I can do. There's nothing I can do. And some time goes by. We're sitting there. The rain got a little bit heavier, and we're sitting there, waiting, waiting, waiting. And I don't even know what I'm waiting for. It's like I don't know what I'm doing at this point. I've kind of just accepted that there's nothing I can do. And Graham turns to me and he goes, "You know what? I'd rather die in my sleep. I'm going back to bed." And he goes back to bed. He slept. So I didn't. And I stayed up until the crack of dawn. And for whatever reason, the sunlight makes you feel safer. I think that's just something that is in all of us. And as the sun was coming up, I realized, I've sat there. My heart was in my ears. It was like I couldn't hear anything but my heartbeat at that point. I was so scared. And we don't hear anything outside of the tent. And Graham wakes up, about that time when the sun's out. We don't hear anything outside the tent. And he's like, "Hey, if they're still out there, we'll make a run for the truck. I'll unlock it and we'll make a run for the truck." I'm like, okay. We unzip the tent and we're ready to bolt, and they're gone. And this is where it's so crazy. It's just so weird. So keep in mind, and this is another thing that I didn't even think of, and I'm assuming most of this was just because my adrenaline was so high that I couldn't hear anything that was going on. Although, from what I understand, it's supposed to work just the opposite, where you hear everything. Your hearing should be sharper. I didn't hear any of this. Here's what happens: we get outside the tent and we're looking all around, and the cooler that, by the way, Graham left out, and his 2 cases of beer that, by the way, he left out. The whole ground, all around where the truck was parked, there were 2 trees, 2 big trees to the right of the passenger door, and that's where Graham kind of jammed the stuff in between these trees. The cooler that was in between the trees was open. The cases of beer were ripped open, but the beer cans, every single one of them, I think it was Budweiser beer, every single one of them was strewn across the ground, bent in a V shape with a hole punctured in the middle of it. Every single one of them. So imagine just turning a can to the side, poking a hole in it and then just bending it and emptying it. Every single one of them. The cooler, all the meat, the packages of meat were taken out, ripped open, eaten. All of the sugar, all the sugar. We had sugary cereal. I remember we had Honey Grams and we had Cinnamon Toast Crunch, and untouched. None of it was touched. The Nutrigrain bars thrown around, none of them open, none of them nothing, none of it was touched. So now I'm thinking, how this is the weirdest thing I've ever experienced in my life. So these two bears came to our tent, harassed us, and just wanted the beer and the meat, and they didn't touch any of the sugar. And I was laughing about it. It was like I just survived one of the strangest, craziest things that's ever happened to me in my life. I can't even believe it. And I never put this together until recently, because the truth is, I was glad to be out of there. We got in that car, we didn't speak the whole ride home, and we left. And we left that job unfinished. He never said another word about it. We didn't talk about what happened the night before, nothing. And I asked my mom recently, because she was friends with his family. I asked her, yeah, it was just yesterday. Do you remember any of this? Do you remember? And she said, yeah, I remember Graham saying that he was really scared and that he didn't understand what happened. He didn't understand it. And now I'm looking back and thinking, I was so happy to be out of there that I never gave it a second thought. I never thought this could have possibly been anything but bears, not realizing that it would be highly unusual for two bears to be in some kind of cooperative, coordinated harassment of two people in a tent and drink the beer. I'm assuming they drank the beer and eat all the meat and leave all the sugar. But I didn't think of it as anything but the craziest, luckiest thing that's ever happened to me, because I'm alive. And I thought that thing was going to come in the tent and kill me. I was
Yeah,
sure of it.
I would think from what I know about most bear attacks when somebody's in a tent is they'll just collapse the tent and just
Yeah.
go after whatever's moving under the rubble. That's how they get, whoever is in a tent and gets attacked, they just get on top and, start going for the movement, while somebody's frantically in the throes of frantic movement under the canopy of a tent that's collapsed on them. I don't know how else a bear would behave, with a tent.
Yeah, I don't either, especially now after hearing more stories about, campers with bears and interactions with bears, and it becomes even more strange when, looking back, and I'm thinking of the two of them and the back and forth, the back and forth, the back and forth, and the turning towards the tent. And I mean, it wasn't a growl at one point. There were growls in there, but it was a roar, like a lion roars, you know. But I've never had a lion roar at me, but I would imagine it's one of the most terrifying feelings you could ever have. And this was, like I said, bone shaking. I felt my chest vibrating when I was laying there and holding the hammer. There's part of me that thinks I don't even think I would have been able to move if this thing came in there. I was that scared. I just have never felt a fear quite like that. Especially thinking, for all intents and purposes, I thought we were going to get eaten alive.
Hmm.
And
Well, there's two things that I want to make a comment on, and that is when you were talking about your heartbeat, that's all you could hear was your heartbeat.
yeah.
I have mentioned my heartbeat several times whenever I tell the story of my heartbeat, and I thought it could feel my heartbeat where it was touching my truck, that he would feel my heartbeat churning, and pulsating. And, that's why I pulled my back off the seat, because I was afraid that he would know I was in the truck if he felt my heartbeat through the metal of the truck. Uh, so it's funny that you worded it like that, because that is what it's like when you're in one of those situations. But yes, just fascinating. But I also have a can story for you from Ice Chest, involved in a property for several years with a family unit of Bigfoot on there, that the tracks, the young ones tracks had been mapped out for 4 years showing growth. So we know that they were there. We know that
Mhm.
there was young ones. Well, we knew that something was taking some of the cans of ice coffee out of our ice. We actually had a recording of an ice chest closing as we were coming back to camp one night. So we start looking in there and start counting the ice coffees, and how many of you had, how many of you had. Well, we're missing like three or four ice coffees. So So we never found a can until almost a year later. We were out on another part of the property, and I found a can, and it was empty, of course, but the pop top was popped open, not inside, which means it was squeezed till it popped open.
Uh, that's incredible. That's incredible. Um, so I guess whatever was in our tent had a different technique. They learned a really different technique. I don't know how efficient it was. Yours might be that might be a little bit better as far as drinkability goes. But
Well, as far as an understanding of why the pop top would be on the popped out rather than in
yeah,
takes away a person the way they open up one. That just means it squeezed it until it popped open.
incredible. Uh, I'm just, I'm curious how I'm curious why they would be interested in something so human. Like it's it's such to me. It's so it just shows how I feel like there's some kind of missing link or something like that there. It's really interesting to me that they they know to wait until some of them do anyway, not these ones, or if these were Bigfoot, they know to wait and they know to open up coolers. I've heard that before on other podcasts before too. Because the cooler at our campsite, it wasn't trashed, it wasn't thrown around, it was just popped open.
Well,
And
have you watched the video on my thing where I said a young one, a juvenile, was going through the stuff on our table at the campsite?
no, I haven't seen
Well,
that.
here's what happened. We came back to camp one night. We would do a lot of nighttime stuff till 2 or 3 in the morning, and we'd come back to camp, and we had a base camp in this low area of this private property. And we knew they were there. We'd had sightings. We caught them on thermal, so we knew they were there. But I have a little bit of OCD, and so I have specific ways that my stuff is set up on the table. So we come back to the table one night, and my silverware box that has all the plastic silverware is set in a certain way where I can just pull my spoons out and pull my sporks out as I need them. But it was laying on its side. And out of everything on that L-shaped, there's two tables in the shape of an L with all of my gear and stuff and cooking supplies and water jugs and all that stuff. But the only thing that was out of place was my silverware box was laying on its side. And I said, something's been on the table. I said, because that has never sat on its side. It's always stood straight up. So something was either just on the table enough to knock that over, but then why would it leave everything else alone? Why is nothing else messed up? Why is
Hmm.
that box full of food not destroyed? So that made us think they're coming into camp because they don't do too much. They just examine things, and we caught them. So we started leaving a recorder on the edge of the table when we'd leave at night. And one night we came back, and at the very end of the table, I had one of them orange 5 gallon water jugs with wet naps on the top of it for cleaning my hands, and right there by the water jug. When I came back to the table, I'd already gotten used to, I would always examine things to see if I noticed anything out of place. And when I looked, the wet naps that are normally on top of that 5 gallon orange water jug was sitting on the table. And I said, that's different. That's never set on the table. It's always been on top of the jug. It's easy to grab them. I said, so we immediately get the recorder and we start listening to it. And sure enough, something systematically goes down that table through every box. You can hear it rummaging through each box, going all the way to the end, and then messing with that package uh, on the whole table. So fascinating, just
Wow.
fascinating.
Yeah. The curiosity that they show. It's really interesting.
And there's a box full of food that they don't touch. So a lot of times, food is not a motivation for them. It's just the
Mhm.
curiosity stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, another thing that they share in common with us. You
Isn't
know,
that crazy?
it really is. Yeah, that's fascinating. I would love to hear more. I would love to hear more of that. Um, so yeah, I mean, that was what happened to me. I told you before, I didn't think of it in any kind of context where this could be a creature that it doesn't supposedly exist. Until I was listening to a podcast and someone had a very, very similar incident happen in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And when I heard it, I just couldn't believe it. And it was two of these creatures, but they saw them, or they saw one of them at least, and everything that they said sounded so much like what happened to us that I couldn't help but think back and realize, this could have been this could have been this could have been the same pair if anything, it was
Yeah, if it
just,
shows a pattern. Yeah.
yeah, it was just so extraordinary.
And you said it was
And
around the same time frame?
yeah, I want to say it was even 2003, because I remember when they said the year and they said Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I just, part of me was thinking, oh, maybe this is Graham, but it wasn't him telling the story. And um, yeah, I the fact that it scared him enough to just leave, and we never went back and finished that. I don't know how any of that worked out. I was more than happy not to go back there. Making $8 an hour, doing grunt work. It's not worth dying.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm sure the game official that hired him to do that would have reached out to him and said, "Hey, buddy, what happened? Why
yeah,
why didn't you finish it?" I would
yeah,
like to be a fly on the wall with that conversation.
yeah. Me too. And I wish that there probably is a way that I could even reach out to him and just ask him that question, because it's been 2 decades now, and there's no hard feelings or anything like that. There's just a really weird year for me personally. So yeah, I would love to know what happened with that, and what did he say to him, and what does he think that it was, because I didn't realize that he had gone and talked to, like I said, him and I weren't close. When we went back and I was renting the room from him, we weren't buddies, and we never discussed it. And he was going through a hard time, I understand that. But the fact that he mentioned it to his family, and that my mom remembers him saying how strange it was and weird, just kind of also adds another layer to it. So
Wow. Yeah, often, I mean, of course, maybe rangers and game officials are a little more freely, they'll speak about it maybe more now because it's so widespread knowledge now than opposed to back then. So, but it
yeah,
would be interesting just to find out if, when he did mention it to whoever did hire him and he said, "Hey, this is what happened. We're not going back." And maybe the official would have revealed something about, yes, we've had a problem with something going on like that more than once. Uh,
yeah, yeah. I wish I had, part of me wishes that I had shown more interest at the time, but truth be told, I just was
well,
so
you can
happy
you can
there.
be an investigator now. I mean, if the guy's
Yeah,
still alive, maybe he'd be more than willing to fill you in, and then for your own peace of mind, you'll be like, "That's what you thought," and
yeah,
and maybe he did have a discussion with the game official. I can't imagine a game official not trying to contact him after that and saying, "Hey, are you going to finish it? Why
yeah.
didn't you
We
finish
lost
it?
that
What's going
job.
on?" Yeah.
We never turned around. So yeah, it's really it's really something that, for years, like I said, I was just telling the story about these two really weird bears that stood up on two legs and stomped around on two legs and roared at us, and thankfully didn't decide to come in the tent and tear us to pieces.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to pull up. Vito has started a podcast that you guys might enjoy, and he's just getting started with that. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this up so you guys can take a look at it. Vito Luis Ramos. Is that how, did I say that correctly?
It's fine. It's good.
So there you go, folks. You might take a picture stamp of that and check it out. Uh, I hope to go on there sometime and maybe we'll have a discussion, kind of like I did tonight. I filled you in on a couple of little happenings that I've been a witness to.
Yeah,
So maybe we could have some discussions like that.
I would love that. Thank you so much for sharing that with everyone too, and for being so gracious and responding to my email. I mean,
Well,
I
hey,
really
I
appreciate it
like it.
from
I
you.
like it. I think your story is incredible. I mean, I think there's probably an 80 to 85, 90% chance that it is actually the target species that we enjoy the most. Uh, I'd give it a 10%, maybe could be a bear, but there was a lot of weird behaviors there that I don't know if I can. Two bears working in tandem to get what they wanted and not destroy a tent that they could have easily destroyed and things like that. Two bears together seemed like they'd be a little more aggressive, not not standoffish at all. Egging each other on, kind of stuff. In a frenzy. So
Yeah.
yeah, that whole thing that's a good story.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for letting me share it.
Yeah, hopefully we'll meet up again and on your show. That'd be great.
I would love that. I'll we'll talk outside of this, and we'll put something together because I'd love to pick your brain on everything that you have going on and hear your story, because I've purposely avoided hearing too much details of your story because I want to hear it kind of
Oh wow.
first.
You
So
mean you mean the Chickasaw Park one?
I want to
You
hear
have
it.
not heard that one? I cannot
No,
believe that.
no.
You're not there's no way you are not going to believe it.
I really want to hear it for the I've wanted to connect with you, and I purposely don't listen to some things for those purposes because I just want a genuine reaction, and I want to really make it more conversational, and also just let the person speak and tell the story, because to me that's what I want. I don't want to hear myself talk. I want to hear
Okay.
everything from you.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you better earmark about 2.5 hours for it because it's a long, convoluted getting to where it has to go. Do you
I've
need
been
it?
waiting. Please, you can speak as long as you want. I'm personally a big fan of long form podcasts. I love it. So you can speak as long as you want.
Well, as
Um,
many times as I've told the story, I've always not liked the fact that I couldn't tell too much of the pre-story because there's a lot of pre-story. I wouldn't have had what happened to me if I didn't know everything that happened prior to that set up what happened to me. Somebody else had set up something that I was the beneficiary of. So I'd like to lay that out so everybody knows everything, so that when you hear what happened to me, you're like, I know why that happened now because of what happened before, and so it's just a long story.
that's okay. That's my favorite kind of storytelling. So you are the floor is yours, and I will share it with. There's a lot of people who are listening to the show now because they're friends and family, but who have never been exposed to this kind of stuff, who don't take it seriously, who think that everyone who talks about these things is some kind of lunatic. And I really want to show that's not true. And there's a huge difference between skepticism and closed-mindedness. And I really want to show people that that you can have conversations like this, even if it's something that you're uncomfortable with or you don't think exists. If you're listening to rational people talk about it and you don't take it seriously at that point, or you don't take their story seriously, I should say, that's up to you. But I want to present it as is, and however long that takes, I'm in. I'm in. I
Cool.
want to hear it.
Cool.
So
Well, yeah. I mean, if but yours is just going to be a podcast, so it's not like we have a video format.
it's just going to be a podcast.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's no big deal. It's just that I can't show any pictures and stuff like that, and I do have
Well,
some pictures. Uh,
we could I have the option to do both and
well,
to have.
I tell you what. If you invite me to your show, and I will lay the whole thing out there, you have to go to my YouTube and watch my Chickasaw Park encounter video because it has pictures, it has everything that happened. Because you need to have for us to have a back and forth, I need you to formulate your own questions by watching it so that we can have some really good dialogue. Uh, because there is some stuff that went down that I think about it almost every day. So yeah, it's amazing. So
I'm gonna do that probably either start it tonight and finish tomorrow, or start it tomorrow and finish the next day. I have a pretty tough boss. My 8.5 month old, she's a pretty tough boss right now, but I
well, I can tell you this.
I'm excited to hear it, man.
I had an encounter with a large male which was every bit of 8.5 foot tall, and within about 10 foot, and there was a juvenile with him that was about my size, so he was about 5.5 foot easy. Uh, Later, I get two pictures within that park system of, I believe, that big male. I got a picture of him up on a hillside looking through some trees at me, and you can see he looks like a big gorilla with big, huge shoulders. And I also, 4 months after my encounter, I keep going back there. I keep going back there. I'm setting traps. I'm trying to hide cameras, set things up. I catch the juvenile coming into my campsite, and I got his very close up of his head. And when he stood up, I caught his armpit and his chest and shoulder. But he's so close to the camera that it's washed out white, but you can see that it's a round head with ears on the side of the head. Uh, so I've got those pictures on there for you to enjoy, and I believe it's the same juvenile and the big male that I had the encounter with.
I'm gonna start checking it out tonight, guys, because I can hear I can hear the TV's on out there, which means the baby's sleeping. So I might have a chance. But no, I've watched clips and bits and pieces of things that you've talked about and stuff like that. But for me, I wanted to just have like a really sincere, conversation with you. But if you tell me to do it, I'm gonna do it. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, and then we'll schedule. I'll come and I'll speak on your podcast, and we'll have a great conversation.
Okay, I can't wait. I'm going to take notes and everything. You've got me
Great,
really pumped for this. And
right on.
I'm like I said, I'm so honored that you responded to me. I'm so honored to be on your show. Thank you so much for having me. It
Uh,
really, 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 really means a lot.
Vito,
Seriously.
I appreciate it. I truly do, and I want to share. I enjoy this. I really do. And your story is fantastic. I can't wait for everybody to see it. So hopefully we'll get a lot of views on that and get some comments.
Thanks, man. And if you're ever in New Jersey, I live in I don't think we're that far from the Pine Barrens, which apparently has a lot of activity. So if you're ever on the East Coast and you're near there doing any of your investigations, let me know. I'll bring you to a great restaurant over here.
Well, all I know about the Pine Barrens is when Paulie and Christopher chased that Russian dude
One
there.
of the greatest episodes of all time. He's still there. That guy's still there. That's probably who everybody's talking about.
Right.
It's the
Uh,
Russian.
all right, man. Well, thank you so much. We'll
Thank
we'll we'll
you.
be in touch.
Yeah, send me a text and have a great night.
All right, you too, buddy.
Bye bye.